One day earlier this year, my younger son invited me to see the jail that he had built out of his Legos. Silas is 4, and he pointed with his tiny fingers to the place where the people who are bad are captured. And then he told me a story. These people were building a city, and they found an old jail in the woods, and so they took it because everybody needs to put people in jail, and then they built their city around it. I'm so proud. As Silas chattered on, I wondered, as I sometimes do, what future awaits him, awaits all of our children. The news is discouraging. Waking up is hard. From the overwhelming awe and heartbreak that we may have felt at reading the new Jim Crow and learning about the scope and depth of incarceration of Black men in the United States, to Ferguson last year, to Baltimore and Charleston this year, to say nothing of systematic voter disenfranchisement, a widening income gap, and the 800-pound gorilla of climate change and environmental destruction. I wonder, in the face of all of this, what tools this particular, peculiar religious upbringing is actually giving my children. What does our Unitarian Universalist faith have to say about living into this broken, beautiful, unequal world? And what are we doing here in the midst of that question, in this place, on Sunday mornings? We spend a lot of time as a people trying to explain to those outside of our movement what we even are. We spend a lot of time trying to agree within our movement on who we even are, right? Meanwhile, we lack flashy holidays. We have no gory special effects. We can neither entice you with the magical promise of heaven nor threaten you with hell. It might be more convenient if we could, because there's a truth here. Being a Unitarian Universalist, it's hard. As a practicing you will reject easy answers, the ones that seem so very obvious to everyone else. It can make family gatherings or phone calls with the grandparents just a bit awkward. You will be called to make yourselves uncomfortable sometimes voluntarily. And then, check this out, we're going to ask you to invite your friends to make themselves less comfortable as well. With that kind of a sales pitch, it is a good thing that we don't work door to door. And so I wonder, what can I offer to either of my young sons? They're 5 and 8, born UU. What can I offer to make any of this palatable? To make our church and the call for transformative sacrifice appealing, or at least deeply relevant? To help them see the life-giving beauty of the idea that it's not about you. When we live in a larger society that says, put your quarter in and then kick that machine until it gives you your gumball. I think that there's an answer. And it's not that our church is only for practicing masochists. What if our faith is also needed to help us connect deeply with hope? The other side of digging in our heels to stand on the side of love in our communities, it can be a deep weariness. Sometimes you may have wanted to just stop walking, to stop caring, or at least to give your forehead some keyboard after reading the latest gospel according to Facebook. We need hope. We need it as we take a stand against the deepening divide between rich and poor, against environmental destruction, against institutionalized racism. We need hope also in these smaller, simpler moments of our day-to-day lives. Americans are working longer hours than ever, and meanwhile, wages in the last 10 years have remained stagnant when considered against inflation. The poorest in our nation have actually lost ground, and the middle class is feeling the pinch. Perhaps you are. My family, too, we've added a kid since the crash of 2008, and meanwhile, nothing seems to go as far. I mention this because it is fertile ground for scarcity mentality to take hold of us. There is not enough right now, and there might be even less tomorrow, or at least that's what we tell ourselves. Insert a 24-hour news cycle and connective technologies that we either cannot or do not want to turn off. Who's got your cell phone on secretly in here right now? Add politics that at every level has become more dollar-driven than ever before. Politics that have learned that fear, your fear, is an excellent motivational tool. Put all of these things together and add a cumulative lack of sleep, a loss of meaningful touch or deep relationship with family or community. We are wired in this contemporary moment to react to negative stimulus. The world in the year 2015 can feel threatening and unsafe even in the space of your own living room, even without unrest and injustice on the scale of Baltimore or Ferguson. But is this how we want to live? And is it even true? Consider this. Did you know that violent crime is actually at its lowest level since 1978? And that's number of crimes. If you actually consider percentages given population increase, the average person is less likely to be murdered, assaulted, mugged, or brutalized now than at almost any point in American history, at least by those not in power. It's true. But do you feel that way? And do you see our police departments acting like that's true? Why are our 4-year-olds building us jails if this is our actual context? Did you know also that we threw away enough food, and I am not talking about your dinner scraps, I mean mass dumping at the level of corporate agriculture. Enough food to feed all of the hungry in America, estimated at 50 million people, if we just reduce food waste by half. What's with the scarcity mentality? Did you know that educational attainment is up? 90% of students nationwide graduated from high school for the first time ever last year. And life expectancy in the United States hit a record high this year. This is our context. We need to check our privilege, to share our wealth, to fight for justice, but all is not lost, my friends. So does church, your church, matter in combating the relentless messages of fear and shortfall, in framing a better way to live, in demanding responses to victories and to tragedies that reflect our own needs and can shape a better tomorrow? You bet it does. Where besides our churches are you hearing this message? Who else is going to say this to you this week? It matters that we are together in worship each Sunday because what happens here touches souls. And if we let it, this place will be a fulcrum for our weeks and a framing for our lives. But hearing a new message is just a starting point. What we must find is a different way of living and the hope that can give us the strength to try it. We're dealing with compassion burnout, and there is a treatment. It's threefold. First, we have to nourish ourselves, our bodies, and our spirits. Second, we are going to change the definition of success. And finally, we need to know with the confidence of deep faith that what we can do, the work of each of our own small hands, it's enough. With the first point about nourishing ourselves, I sincerely hope that the rituals you participate in here at church are part of what nourish you. These extend well beyond this worship hour. When you meet for coffee or have a church picnic or break bread together before a meeting, you're nourishing yourselves, bodies, souls, community. The airlines have a phrase for this, putting on your own oxygen mask. The idea is that in the event of an unexpected difficulty, you have to attend to yourself, not eventually when you get around to it, but first, because only then can you count on being in a position to help others. Our faith communities are part of this ethic. We care for ourselves here so that we may leave strengthened to care for the world. And soul nourishment is not just about food. We feed ourselves with beauty. Call to mind again that moment, that vision that you thought of. I hope you will carry it with you throughout this coming week and train your eye to look for those other visions and moments that will feed you as you keep walking. We feed ourselves also with rest. So knowing these things, what care will you offer to yourself in this coming week? What pledge will you make to yourself to feed your soul? Our second task moves us from feeding our bodies and our spirits to using our brains. This is the place where we change the definition of success, and we are going to use one of our Unitarian Universalist theologians and my professor and Linda's, Dr. Sharon Welch at Meadville Lombard Theological School. She takes on this idea of reframing success in her book, A Feminist Ethic of Risk. It may surprise you to learn that this is not actually a book about feminism per se. It's about changing traditional winner-take-all, problem is solved or we failed business model to something that we can actually work with. Challenges as complex as racism, poverty, and gun violence are what social theorists are starting to call wicked problems. A wicked problem has multiple and hidden causes, deep interrelationships with other challenges, and under a traditional way of looking at things, it's unsolvable. In other words, it's hopeless. Except, Welch tells us that this is a ridiculous way of looking at the world. And I agree with her. If our way of seeing solutions means we cannot make things better, the option is not to give up. It's to reframe what we mean as progress. We are told every day that we are powerless to change things, and that means that our shared task as Unitarian Universalists, it's not just to fight injustice. We are the people who are called to stand firm against the sense of disempowerment that prevents other people from acting alongside us. The feminist part of Welch's book is a reframing of what progress means, in that we let go of the idea that things are only worth doing if we're likely to succeed, to see clear and swift fruits of our labors. Instead, We have to see that the struggle itself is noble, and it is that struggle over a long time and in the face of long odds that ultimately changes things. That struggle and our courage to engage it. Empowerment is so important, and it matters on an individual level too, and that brings me to our third task, the heart task. The faith task, which is what makes what we do here in this space, in our religious communities, different from our good work in the rest of the world. We have to know that what we each can do with our own hands, it's enough. The Benedictine Catholics call this idea radical hospitality. They, in fact, have built a rule of living around the idea that help the one next to you is sufficient and it is sacred as a response to the world's hunger and weariness. We, UUs, follow the spiritual guidance when we accept the one in our path, our neighbor, our friend, as ours, and help that person without worrying about whether helping that one single person eases the burdens of all travelers everywhere. In fact, Benedictine spirituality says that it's not for us to ask that question. We are simply called to be God's hands and feet here on earth, because the helping gesture made with the inner peace of great faith is itself enough. And there's beauty in that. Doing what we can help us open our hands and solve what Parker Palmer calls our heart problem. And yet, as Unitarian Universalists, we are called not just to use our hands, but to use our heads. And so we differ from the Benedictines in our belief that the larger question, why are things this way, that's our question. And so I'm going to tell you a fish story. Perhaps you remember the movie Finding Nemo. It's a Disney Pixar animated feature from 2003. Toward the end of the movie, there are a bunch of sardines that are caught in a net that is being hoisted from the sea at the end of a crane. The fish are heavy and the crane is struggling just a bit from the load. But what's needed for the fish to escape, and this is all told from the fish's perspective, what's needed is extra force. The problem, though, is that all of those 1,000 fish caught in the net are swimming in different directions. They are panicked. They're confused. They are acting as frightened individuals. Nemo, a young clownfish who has struggled up to this point to find his identity as a leader, he's caught in the net too. But he is small enough to escape. And rather than fleeing, Nemo sees what must be done, and he sticks around at great risk to himself to try to convince those other fish to save themselves. And what can save them is so very simple. Nemo takes a deep breath, and then he speaks the encouragement that can change everything. Swim down together. His voice is not enough, though. He needs others to be speaking the same truth, and so he swims in and out of that net, telling every fish he touches, tell everyone to swim down together. And you know what? Those fish do it. First a few, and then more, and then all of them. And does that remind you of anything? Hundreds of thousands of voices speaking out in favor of Planned Parenthood, leading to a reversal within 24 hours of the Komen Foundation's decision to defund them. We as a people did that. Federal and then state and then local judges acting in favor of marriage for everyone. And you know, even here in Iowa, early adopters, you know that did not begin with the court system. It was people. It was you, people. More than 1 million people speaking out to tell their stories so that the healthcare bill could become a reality. swim down together. And it's still going on, fighting across the heartland for Medicaid expansion. And we can see it also if we look in the Black Lives Matter movement. When you see Bree Newsom at the top of that flagpole, I want you to see Nemo. When you see the Mall of America 11 standing up and then lying down in front of riot police, I see Nemo. Swim down together. There is so much out there to convince us that our voices do not matter, that we are licked before we even start, that things are going from bad to worse, and the only way we can cope is to shut that still small voice inside of us up. Be ours a religion that counters the toxic belief that a single voice of dissent does not matter. Be ours a faith that models the heart and courage to act not in isolation and fear, but together. Be ours a church that helps us to pause and be nourished, leaving here comforted and strengthened to take one more step. Until there is peace in the streets and peace in the homes, and until our 4-year-olds stop building us jails and start handing out stars, we have work to do. And the first task is to keep our hopes alive. Amen.